Hello and welcome to Electoral Dysfunction from Sky News with me, Beth Rigby.
Me, Ruth Davidson.
And me, Harriet Harman.
So nice to be here. Harriet and I are in London. Ruth's down the line, which I don't like so much. I'm trying to get her to come down for a Christmas edition / party.
I think I'm coming to that, and I think we're going to have some special guests, and I think our listeners will like them.
Mm-hmm. And we have to wear Christmas jumpers because I've got a new Christmas jumper, which I'm very excited to unleash.
I've got a Christmas jumper, and it has like little kind of tinkly bells on it, so you could listen to my Christmas jumper on the podcast, But I'm not sure it makes the podding any better.
Mine's got lights on, and I'm slightly worried I'm going to electrocute myself.
Well, let's hear from John, who has something to say about our analysis of the Prime Minister last week. John, take it away.
Hi, ladies. I think I can help solve part of Keir Starmer's image drama. I listened to your podcast at 1.2 speed. When Beth played the clip from her interview, I was 100 times more enthusiastic about what he was saying at that speed. What do you think?
Should we have a listen to the clip and see what we think?
I want working people to be better off. I want people to feel the impact of our policies in their pocket so that they can enjoy life in the way that they want to with themselves and their family. The basic securities that people working people
I mean, I have to say, playing it at 1.2, I kind of get is what young people do now, so because they don't have the time, they want to listen to things. But in my head, the only thing I'm thinking is, so basically what you're saying is, record them on a 33 and play them out on a 45 record. And there's only people that are over 40 will have an absolute clue what I'm talking about here.
Well, it's kind of gravitas versus energy, isn't it? I quite like the speeded up version.
I liked it. I felt like there was an urgency. There was like, I'm a man in a hurry.
I thought you needed the loo.
So I really need to get through this pool clip because I need a wee.
Yeah.
Can we just for a laugh speed it up to 2 times just to see what it sounds like? Just indulge me.
I want working people to be better off. I want people to feel the impact of our policies in their pocket so that they can enjoy life in the way they want to with themselves and their family. The basic securities that working people want. A decent wage.
Well, he just sounds like a chipmunk on that.
Alvin, Simon and Theodore. Do.
Thatcher lowered her voice. Maybe we just need to put Keir Starmer on 1.2 times. Give him a bit of energy. But Ruth, generally, I didn't know that the kids were speeding things up just to get through content.
I don't really know what the kids are into, to be honest. I'm a 46-year-old Tory baroness. I mean, can you get more out of touch?
Yes, I am. I'll raise you on that one, Ruth.
Oh, well, there we go.
I enjoyed that. Thank you, John. That was a perfect voice note / diversion for us. So please use the burner phone anytime for other suggestions about Keir Starmer, which we will enjoy. That's 07934 200 444. Anyway, should we get on to what we're talking about today? It's a historic week in politics because the assisted die-in bill will be voted on. It's a landmark moment of societal change, potentially, if this bill passes. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're also going to ask whether we need to be more focused on the rise of reform. Number 10 are very alive to Nigel Farage, and we're going to talk a bit about what's going on around the country. And in fact, I am hot-footing it to a reform press event after this podcast, which is why I'm in my political editor outfit today with my very bright lipstick on and my boss lady suit jacket. And we're going to check in on how Kemi Badenoch is doing. I think it's about a month since she won the Tory crown. Is she giving it a good shine or is it all a bit dull? But look, let's kick off with assisted dying. This could be a historic week in politics. MPs will vote on assisted dying for the first time in almost a decade. And we're actually recording this before the MPs debate the bill and before they vote. So look, it's such a big deal, and Ruth and Harriet care very deeply about this subject. So we've decided that we're going to do an extra ED episode on Friday afternoon with our reactions to the result, whichever way it goes. It's going to be a sequel to this episode, to think of it like that. Why is it such a big moment, Harriet?
Well, it is a huge moment, and it's about individual choice. It's about whether you are allowed by law to choose the time of your own dying. And I certainly personally want that for myself. Usually I look at these votes in the bigger picture situation, but I feel very personally about this because I would like to be in control, if that's necessary, towards my own death. So I'm really hoping that they do vote to allow it and not to deny me that choice. Even if they don't want to have an assisted dying, I would like the possibility of it.
And Ruth, David Cameron voted against assisted dying in 2015. He's now done an opinion piece in the Times newspaper saying that he now supports the bill. He argues it will bring a meaningful reduction in human suffering. So he's had a bit of a change of heart, as have you, Ruth. What did you think of his intervention?
I think David Cameron's a really interesting one on this because a lot of people don't really know what he did between stepping down as Prime Minister and then coming back as Foreign Secretary. And there was, 6-7 years in there? Yeah. And he spent his time as the President of Alzheimer's Research UK, raised tens of millions of pounds for them. So he has spent a lot of time in the last decade talking about and thinking about sort of end-of-life issues. And I thought it was interesting because partly, I think in 2015, there was a sense perhaps that the society wasn't ready, and also there was a bit about his own faith in there and a bit about the medical profession. And I do just think that there's been gradual shifts in almost all of these areas. So I thought it was interesting to hear from him.
One thing that has interested me is that as we talk about it, it's still really unclear about which way this vote will go.
Absolutely, and it's come quite soon after a general election when there's a lot of new members of Parliament. And of course, this is not a whip vote, so there's not a party line. Each one of them has individually got to make up their mind, and many of them are saying they are finding it hard to make up their mind. So that's why there's so many undecideds. For new MPs, it's a very big decision, up there with should we end capital punishment or not, up there with should we allow abortion or not. It's one of the most huge pieces of social legislation which has come before the House of Commons for their choice.
Ruth, one thing that in a way you would have thought, given that the Commons has been flooded with Labour MPs, and Labour tends to be more socially progressive in how they vote on legislation, you might have thought that this would be a slam dunk, that this bill would pass. Who do you think could swing it in the Commons?
We haven't talked about them much since the election, and I actually think that the Lib Dem bloc is going to be quite important here because there is a split in the Conservatives and there's a split in Labour. And actually the Lib Dems are a pretty big bloc now. There's 72 of them. Yes, their leader, Ed Davey, has talked a huge amount about palliative care and end of life and caring for his very disabled son and why he's against it and all his personal reasons. But actually, the party position on this, as far as any parties have, and the majority of MPs' positions on this within the Lib Dems has been pretty sympathetic to this. If you see a block of maybe 60, 62, 63 Lib Dems voting for this, that might be enough to swing it. But this is one of these votes where, in a parliament where there's this enormous majority for Labour, this will be one of the very few votes where there's actual jeopardy. And I think just to remind people of the progress of this doesn't mean that assisted dying will be introduced if it passes. What it means is that it goes on to the next stage of parliamentary scrutiny.
If they vote it down at second reading, it stops, full stops. The bill is finished. But it's not actually succeeded if they vote it through on second reading. It then goes forward. And it's not just the MPs on the committee who will have the right to amend it. Every single MP on the floor of the House at report stage can put forward their amendment if they want to toughen up the conditions.
And let's not forget the Lords in all of this. Because this is a free vote, because it's not a party policy, because it's not Labour policy, this could also be voted down in the Lords, even if it passes the Commons. So there's an awful lot of hurdles to go. But the reason we're talking about this being so momentous is this is the stage that it's fallen at before.
If it doesn't get through, then I think it will be over. We won't have new legislation of a possibility of it for at least 10 years or more.
Well, look, that is a big moment in the Commons this week. But shall we move on now and talk about reform? Because they have been quietly winning local council by-elections in the past few weeks. They've just announced they've got 100,000 members. Ruth, that isn't that far off the Conservatives, is it?
No, it's not.
They've been picking up councils all over the place. John Curtis, the polling guru, reckons that they could win 10 seats in the 2026 Holyrood elections. There's 60 seats in the Senate, and talk that Reform could pick up dozens there. Harriet, how worried should Labour be?
I think we should be worried. I think there's always been right-wing fringe parties on the fringes of British politics. You think of the British National Party, the BNP, you think of UKIP. But at the general election in the summer, Reform got 4 million votes. And you compare that to, it's nearly half as many as Labour got. Labour got 10 million votes. And it was more than the Lib Dems got. So they established a big presence at the general election. And they're clearly seeking to build on that in council elections. And Labour had a bit of a heart-stopping moment last month when in Pat McFadden's own borough of Wolverhampton, which is where our election supremo is the MP for.
Yeah, just remind everyone who the Pat McFadden is. We know him well.
He's a cabinet minister and he was our general election manager, and he represents a constituency in Wolverhampton, and Reform won a council seat from Labour there. And we scarcely got more votes than the Green. Reform got 652 votes, many more than Labour. So that was a bit of a heart-stopping moment. What happens is council elections happen most years. The next big council elections in county councils is happening in May. But in the meantime, councillors resign or they die or they move home so that there are council by-elections. And those of us who watch these things very closely, there's a very good thing on X, which is Britain Elects, where they, on the Friday after, because they're always on Thursday, these council by-elections, they show you what's happened to the vote. And what it's showing is that Labour is down 10 points since the general election. The Tories is more or less no change since the general elections. Lib Dems are up 1, Greens up 2, but Reform are up 11%. And for the most part, Reform has not had candidates in council elections because they just haven't had enough people to step forward as candidates. And sometimes the main parties struggle to find candidates, but they're obviously doing a big push on that. The point is, Labour's fall in popularity since the general election is not benefiting the Tories, it is benefiting Reform.
I do follow Britain Elects, but I need to start looking more carefully at it on a Friday. So thank you for that, Harriet.
Well, some people look at the football scores. Other of us look at Britain Election. I was very interested in what people look at. Our agricultural spokesman in the Lords, she checks the dairy prices every day. Well, Britain Elects is my equivalent.
I do the football scores. I'm now going to do Britain Elects as well. Ruth, did you know that? And does that make your kind of like blood run cold?
I think one thing I don't really want to do is talk them up so much it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because Reform should have to do the same hard yards as every other political party does. But I think particularly in Scotland, we saw Reform when they first started, and they did pretty well. They got 7% of the vote at the general election, and that's without having much of a machinery. And a lot of that was kind of disaffected Tories, but they're really setting their sights now on cannibalising the Labour and the SNP vote. And I think it's one of those ones where it's not just about a policy platform. It is very much about, do you feel as if politicians are all the same? Have they all let you down? Do you feel as if you're not listened to? Do you feel as if they're a whole bunch of folk that are, they've got their head in the clouds, they're miles away from everything? And there is an element of Trumpism about that. If you look at people in very poor parts of the United States that are voting for a guy who was born a billionaire and craps on a golden toilet, but think he's going to stick it to the man. They don't think he is the man, even though he's a former president, even though he has all this luxury. They think he's going to stick it to the man. You can kind of see how that populist Farageist will shove it right up them appeals, whether your background is traditionally voting for left of centre parties or traditionally voting for right of centre parties.
I think Labour sort of would argue to me, actually, the flip of Labour voters to Reform at the moment is quite shallow. It's not a big group. It actually is disaffected Conservative voters rather than Labour voters flipping to Reform.
Well, I think it's not so much let's try this other party when people are voting Reform. It's a kind of shout out against the establishment, and Labour is the establishment now. And the conventional view is that across Europe, the incumbent governments, the established parties, can't deal with populism and they're all losing out to it. But the exception is in Denmark, where they had a very big rise of their Denmark People's Party, and they actually beat it back. And you can either do it by trying to exclude the far-right party, which is what they tried in Germany and it actually hasn't worked, or by what they did in Denmark is really listening to what was driving those voters towards the Danish People's Party. And immigration and concern about illegal immigration was one of the drivers. And although they were a progressive, centrist group of parties, in Denmark, they did actually address those. And then it worked. And now the Danish People's Party is back on the margins. And I'm sure that's what Keir Starmer will be doing as well. At the end of the day, with democracy, you've got to listen to what people's concerns are. You've got to listen to their fears. You can't just say they're irrational, they're wrong. And if there's a protest, you've got to listen to that and respond to it.
So the thing that I want from Steer
Karma.
Yeah, Steer Karma. I mean, if you could
Let's
steer
just
calmer,
call him Steer Karma. It doesn't feel very calm.
No.
From Steer Karma, what we want is
a bit of hope. I get that it was really important to this government when they came in and they had tough decisions to make sure that they pinned the reason for those tough decisions on the previous and outgoing government. I get all of that. It was really obvious how the Labour campaign, how sober it was. There wasn't any of the hopey-changey thing. There was the changey thing, but there wasn't the hopey-changey thing. And since they've come in, tell us that we're getting better. Tell us that we're getting there. Tell us what we're working towards. And I think maybe there's a wake-up call here that reform is on the march. They have to start telling people not just, we hear you on immigration and we're going to kick more people out. We also have to say that your life is going to get better. Not just we're going to blame other people for the state of the country, which is essentially what anti-immigration messages pretty much are, but also this is what we're doing, this is how it's going to get better, this is how your hospital is going to get better, this is how your children are going to have a better school and more opportunities in life, and this is how they're going to be able to get on the housing ladder.
But it's not just saying it's going to get better, it's got to obviously get better as well, and that takes time. I mean, people didn't vote in such huge numbers for the change that they did vote for in the summer because they thought things were fine. Things were not fine in the public services, not fine in the cost of living. And actually, it is going to take a while to sort that out.
But Harriet, they didn't vote in massive numbers. You got a massive majority.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying they voted in masses.
But in terms of the number of people voting Labour, the enthusiasm was to get the Tories out. The enthusiasm wasn't to usher in Labour because I believe they're missing a strand of their narrative, and the strand has to be hope.
Part of Keir Starmer's challenge, obviously, is to try and build a narrative where he does take the public with him, because whatever the rights and wrongs of it at the moment, he clearly is not taking the public with him, and the polling is bad and it is bumpy in there. And I think that Downing Street is quite tense at the moment. I think it's hard when you've won an election and you're getting a rough ride in the polls and every decision you're making is being heavily criticised. And I think that in terms of a comms job at the moment, they don't seem to be taking the country with them. Reform seem to be a beneficiary of the exhaustion people have with politicians that Starmer himself talked about at the general election. And I think what we should maybe do after the break is maybe talk about how the official opposition, the Conservatives, are doing and how they're going to deal with trying to re-engage the public in what they've got to say. OK, well, look, we are back from the break. And last week we brought you the essence of Starmer. So I thought it was only fair, or we thought it was only fair, that we should check in on Kemi Badenoch. And as if on cue, Sean sent us a message to say, I would love to hear your thoughts on how Kemi's getting on. My thoughts are a bit lacklustre. The SNP leader made more of an impression in Prime Minister's questions this week. Well, Ruth.
Yeah.
Give me and Harriet your take on how you think she's doing. And then I'm going to lift the lid a bit on sort of how it's been from a journalistic perspective trying to cover the new leader of the opposition? Because we always said in this pod, we talk a bit about how the sausage is made. So I'm going to give you a bit of the to and fro that goes on behind the scenes. But Ruth, let's kick it off with you. She's your leader.
That was painful for
I know.
Ruth.
I did that just to watch your face. I'd like to play poker with you. Your poker face isn't very good. Neither's mine is shit, by the way. You always take my money in poker, everyone.
Yeah. We can play poker anytime. I would back myself.
What, to beat me?
Yes, I would. I would 100% back myself. I think I could flick an eyebrow at you and you'd absolutely dissolve and just tell me what's in your hands.
Well, apparently people say they know my mood just by the way I walk, which is just, there's no mystery in this lady over here. But sadly, I always wanted to be mysterious. Never mind. Ruth, how do you think she's doing?
I think it's early days, but I think I'm a little bit disappointed. I would have expected a bit more activity. There's a tempo and a pace that you can adopt, which shows that you mean business, that this is a fresh start, and whether you choose to do that by looking to your membership and shoring up where you are within the party and how that goes, whether you choose to do that in a parliamentary setting and use Parliament as the crucible for your message making, whether you choose to do that over the heads of Parliament and speak directly to people through the media. You know, there's lots of different ways you can do it. Actually, I'm not seeing her doing terribly much of any. So she stands up on a Wednesday and does PMQs. And then what does she do in between? And the stuff that she has done, so she's done a kind of profile in the Telegraph. She's done an event at the CBI, which is the Confederation of British Industry, which is kind of big bosses. And she's done this week a kind of event on migration. They're not terrible, but who is she speaking to? This is people that should already be part of the tribe. We have to go beyond the tribe, and I'm not sure that's going to be enough for a recovery from the Tories.
Well, I was very much in, let's see how she's doing. You know, she might not be as bad as everybody predicts she is. And I must say, I've made a much quicker judgment than I thought I would, that she's absolutely going nowhere. If you look at what she said in her immigration speech, I mean, there is no fresh start at all. When you think of all the people who'd voted Conservative over the years and then didn't vote Conservative at the last general election, is there anything that she is saying that is going to convince them that the concerns they had about the Conservatives before, that there's been change and therefore they can, as Ruth says, make a fresh start? There is no fresh start. It's the same old song. And I think quite soon she's going to lose the mic. I think quite soon she'll still be doing Prime Minister's questions, but really nobody's going to be listening to her because she's put forward that she is not going to be changing the party and it's going to continue to dwindle.
Harriet, on the migration stuff, Kemi Badenoch does this impromptu speech, which I will go into the how the sausage is made bit in a sec. And you're right in terms of there wasn't kind of any sort of radically new announcements. The one thing I would say that I thought she did, which I don't think she did in her first public appearance to the nation the day after she won the Tory leadership, when she said she thought Partygate was overblown. That was, I can tell you, because I spoke to some people in the shadow cabinet, I mean, many Conservatives had their heads in their hands over that, because they're like, the verdict the public gave at the general election was that you might think Kemi Badenoch is overblown, but the public felt very deeply and strongly about this, and there was an emphatic rejection of the Conservative Party. And so part of the rebuild is saying, got it wrong, disavowing some of the previous leadership, maybe around Liz Truss and that disastrous mini budget, the behaviours of Boris Johnson in Number 10. And when she sort of says, oh, Partygate overblown, it's kind of talking to a wing of the party. But the reason I brought that up is what she did do in this immigration speech. She did acknowledge the Conservatives had been discredited over immigration. She did say we got it wrong.
But she didn't say anything about how they were going to do it differently.
But the point I'm trying to make is that was, for me, interesting, because it was the first time that she actually took a policy and went, yes, we got it wrong. And if you talk to Labour strategists about what did they do with Keir Starmer after the Corbyn election and the way in which Labour voters had deserted the Labour Party and felt they couldn't vote for Labour under Jeremy Corbyn, part of it was, I'm going to take on my party, I'm going to stamp out anti-Semitism, I'm going to take back control of the Labour Party, and I'm going to have the battle with the party in order to then get the public to converse with us. I did feel like there was a slight pivot from her where she said, we did get this wrong, we failed the public on immigration. But What I wanted to actually talk about is what's going on behind the scenes. Because you are right, Kemi Badenoch did 2 events this week. She did a CBI speech to the Confederation of British Industry, and she did this immigration speech. My job as political editor is to cover the government primarily, to follow around Keir Starmer and think about him all the time and follow him wherever he goes. But also as a political editor, you want to take the official opposition seriously because they are the official opposition. And I did it with Labour when Keir Starmer was in opposition. I want to do it with the Conservatives. Some context, Ruth, around some of the stuff that happened. So the CBI, we're told that Kemi is doing a speech at the CBI. My team asked can we have a question? I haven't spoken to her since she's become leader, not from want of asking. I haven't done an interview with her. She hadn't done a press conference up to this point. And I just wasn't given an answer. And it goes back to Ruth's point about when you're in government, you have a megaphone. When you're in opposition, you have a tiny little squeaky whistle, and you need to get attention. And part of that is trying to frame what your leader is doing in order to try and get some attention. So we didn't even know she was going to do an immigration speech until 3 hours before that speech was going to be made. We didn't know what it was about. And the reason that this is quite extraordinary to me as a kind of old hack that has done this for ages is when you are in opposition, what you need to do is you need to try and grab the megaphone off the government, and it's bloody hard to do because Keir Starmer speaks and it has a material impact on our lives. Kemi Badenoch speaks and it doesn't because she is not actually taking decisions. And to be fair to the Labour Party, they did so much hard work with political journalists, with newspapers, with broadcasters when Keir Starmer became leader to try and get an audience, to try and get engagement. And the Conservative Party at the moment are doing exactly the opposite. And I have to say, I have never seen anything like it in terms of how a party approaches media. And when you ask people around the party, it's a bit like, well, there's a view that Kemi Badenoch doesn't like doing media and she doesn't want to talk to journalists or she's going to do it her way.
Well, then don't be the leader of the opposition. Stop!
I know. Well, but Ruth, it goes back to your point.
I've got almost my head in my hands because in government you get used to, in fact, you almost start resenting how much media attention that you get because everything is picked over. You don't have to work for it. But when you're in opposition, something fundamentally changes and your job is to go out and hustle. Like the job of the leader of the Conservative Party right now is to go out and hustle more votes. It's to speak to people. It's to do a self-flagellation tour. It's to apologise for the stuff we got wrong. It's to show people that we've changed. And it's to start putting together, slowly, bit by bit, a policy platform that can lead us into the next election in 5 years' time. So if I was in charge of the UK Tory party right now, if I wanted to do a business speech, I wouldn't have done it at the CBI. I would have done it at the Federation of Small Businesses, the people that are most affected by this national insurance change. And I would have had damn sure what my policy was going to be and what it was that I was going to be able to tell them. There have been so many kind of almost open goals for a new leader of the opposition. Why is she not going off and speaking to pensioners? We've got a great story to tell on having kept up the winter fuel allowance. Not only that, having introduced the triple lock for pensioners, of understanding the needs of old people, particularly in rural communities. People now, as we're coming into this cold snap, she could have been doing something about that. And the idea that you have a speech, you don't put out a trail for those journalists that can't make it to it, that you don't then do a Q&A afterwards. Like, she can't be high-handed about this, and she can't be lazy. She has to be humble and she has to work bloody hard.
Do you think that's what's going on? Do you think she's been lazy or do you think she just doesn't want to do it?
Look, I don't know the woman, so I don't know what her personal tempo of operations is and how she runs her office. She might be doing tons of things that we're not seeing, but there's a problem in that we're not seeing.
It's like
them.
She's got nothing to say.
So what's interesting in all of this is last week, because it had been 3 weeks or something, we hadn't heard a thing from her. I'm like, is she going to do a political editor round? Are we going to have some sort of review announcement about what went wrong in the election? You know, like Labour did a kind of what lessons can we learn? Is there going to be a press conference? And it's like, no, Beth, no.
At this stage, Beth, I would settle for a sit-down feature piece where we find out who Kemi Badenoch is, talk about her family, talk about her background. Like, we've not even had that.
So this is really interesting. So I was talking to some of the people in Labour about this week. They said, when she first won, we were a bit worried because we thought actually this person has this ability to cut through, like might be quite maverick. not a bland politician. Now they are saying they are much more relaxed about it, that she's dropped like a stone. She's not really defining who she is to the public who do not know her. And the thing with Kemi is, as you were saying, Ruth, there might be a world where she goes on podcasts to talk about who she is, or she does a documentary, or she does a political edit round, or she has a policy to announce, or she goes on a listening tour, or she does something to introduce herself to the public. And they aren't doing any of that. And the point is that she at the moment has an audience of journalists and media outlets that will take coverage, and they will go to a press conference and they will cover the speech. But that is something that you actually need to work on. And I guess the risk for her is, as you said it, Harriet, that if it carries on like this, people just actually stop listening. And I do think people in the shadow cabinet, they are worried about it. Interestingly, she appointed in the past week, and this is very inside Westminster, so forgive me everyone out there, but she appointed Lee Rowley, who's a former MP, as her chief of staff, and a guy called Henry Newman, who worked with Michael Gove. He's her deputy chief of staff. And I think that there is a hope within certainly the Conservative Party, because people know, I mean, they might not say, you know, they know what's going on. They're like, this is a bit of a shambles. And will these two people sort of professionalise the outfit, or make it clear to the leader that whether you want to do it or not, you need a strategy of introducing yourself to the public and being relevant.
Yeah, well, also, we've heard that before. We heard that with Boris when he came in, that he would actually be more like a chairman of the board, and we would have like a CEO that would come in as chief of staff and make sure that everything ran on time in the office and things all worked. And there is a fundamental problem in that it doesn't matter the quality of people that you have around you if the leader themselves isn't willing to make the commitment, doesn't have the vision, doesn't have the clarity, doesn't have the energy to do what needs to be done. And one of the things that you said there about what Labour is viewing Kemi as is that she's not defining herself. Well, there is a massive just klaxon going off in my head here, because if Labour have worked out that she's not defining herself, it doesn't take an awful lot of steps to decide, well, we can define her ourselves. And it will not be in a way that is helpful to the Conservative Party. They wait for the first clangor, and the first clangor is what defines her, and they just hammer it. And she gave a little bit of a window this week, because PMQs, it was good enough. It started off reasonably well in the budget stuff. It completely fell apart as soon as she went to, like, a petition. Like, why is the leader of the opposition talking to the Prime Minister of a G7 nation talking about a petition, and then having her spinner afterwards saying, oh yeah, well, actually we're saying we should dissolve the election, we should have another election, we want the Prime Minister to resign. He's sitting with a majority. Of course that's not going to happen. It was stupid. It was amateur. It's the amateurness that offends me.
Yes, but also the point about that was, by saying there's a petition that you should resign, all Keir Starmer needs to turn around and say is what he did say, which is, we've just had a petition, we've had a general election. And
he was quite quick on his feet on that. That was a very
he could have
done
he could have done a better biscuit joke, I think. I don't know if you...
Did he crumble?
Yeah, he could have said that exactly. You're taking the biscuit. I think you'll find that your party's crumbling, etc., etc.
You got dunked at the election. Yeah.
Yeah, you got dunked. So yeah. if you don't know what we're talking about, which would be completely normal, she had a series of biscuit gags.
A gag is charitable.
Based on McVitie's. And it was like, wasn't Angela Rayner the ginger nut?
Did anybody else, when they were a kid, do a thing where you hold it in your hand and then you, like, elbow it, and if it breaks into three, you get to have a wish?
No.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's really odd. Okay, I used to do that.
Oh my God. If I'm going to go home and obviously do it and get a wish, clearly... Right, okay, quickly, one piece of advice, please, from each of you to Kemi Badenoch. Harriet.
You've got to show the party's changed.
Show the party's changed. Ruth.
Raise the tempo, be humble, do some bloody work, don't be amateur.
That's all for this episode. We will be back with part 2 on Friday afternoon. Remember, you can get in touch whenever you would like. Voice note us on the WhatsApp to the burner phone, which is 07934 200 444, or email us at electoraldysfunction@sky.uk. And thank you for the messages, and thank you for the speeding up. I might just start doing that with all my interviews just to amuse myself. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.